name is Thomas Allen Moon. I'm the creator and host of the Payback channel. The purpose of the Payback channel is to help Americans who have ordinary money-making skills, in other words, America's middle class, understand what they have at stake regarding how much America taxes, how it taxes, and who it taxes. In this episode, I'll explain why I've written the Payback book and created the Payback channel. My reasons are grounded in where I came from, what my experiences have been, and what I've come to believe. I was born in San Antonio in 1943 during World War II as the son of Thomas Staples Moon Jr. and Louise Hinkle Moon. I come from sturdy peasant stock on both the Moon side of my family and the Hinkle side of my family. On the Moon side, my granddad, Thomas Staples Moon Sr., was one of 11 children born on a farm near Lineville, Alabama. My grandfather was 14 years old when this picture of his family was taken in 1897. In the early 1900s, the Moon family, in search of a better opportunity, moved over 600 miles to a farm near Hillsboro, Texas. All of my granddad's brothers were successful self-made professional men or business owners, and all of his sisters were housewives, as was the custom of the time. One of my granddad's brothers, a medical doctor, became the chief diagnostician at Scott and White Clinic, and another, a classics professor, became the president of William Jewell College. Growing into adulthood, my granddad left the farm, went to a 2-year college in Birmingham, Alabama, moved to Cleburne, Texas, and set up a successful Ford dealership. Throughout his life, my granddad was active in civic affairs and served several terms on the Cleburne City Council and 2 terms as mayor. When the Great Depression wrecked my granddad's Ford dealership, hardly anyone was buying autos during the Depression. He opened and operated a gas station. As a small businessman, my granddad remained active in civic affairs and took particular pride in sponsoring Cleburne High School's football team, as shown on the football program that he sponsored in 1935 in the midst of the Depression. My granddad was typical of the Moon family's willingness to meet life's challenges and make the best of it, sometimes winning, sometimes losing, but always trying. On the Hinkle side, my grandparents, Charles Werner Hinkle and Ardelia Hinkle, were each children of German immigrants and were born in 1872 in the tiny Texas town of Weimar, halfway between Houston and San Antonio. My granddad and my grandmother each grew up on hardscrabble farms and didn't know any kind of life other than a life of hard work. After marriage, right before the turn of the century, my granddad bought a farm in central Texas near the little town of Rosebud, and over the next several years raised a family with 3 sons and 3 daughters, my mother Louise being the youngest. In 1922, my grandparents sold their farm near Rosebud to raise cash to pay for medical bills for Uncle Ben, who was paralyzed from the waist down. Looking for cheaper land, my granddad bought a section of land in LaSalle County, Texas, about 15 miles east of Cotulla, Texas, and 85 miles south of San Antonio. Like many towns, Cotulla was racially divided by railroad tracks, with the Hispanics living on the east side of town and the Anglos on the west side. In the Cotulla of the 1920s and 30s, the Hispanics lived in deep poverty, while the Anglos only lived in poverty. The saving grace of life in LaSalle County in the early 20th century for both Hispanics and Anglos was that if you were willing to grow vegetables and raise chicken, pigs, and cattle, you could always eat. That's what the Hinkles did. Cotulla gained brief national notoriety in the 1960s when LBJ enacted the Great Society and recounted his time in 1928 as a school teacher in Cotulla at what was then called the Mexican School. LBJ's vision of a Great Society, born in no small part from his experience in teaching poverty-stricken Hispanics in Cotulla, was that it's part of government's job to help people in poverty get out of it, and that included people of color. The Hinkle place in LaSalle County was a bramble of mesquite brush, much of which had to be cleared before it could be used for cattle raising and farming. Few people today can imagine what it'd be like to travel over 200 miles over dusty roads in a rickety old unreliable truck, stuffed with all the family's possessions, and with 6 kids, one of which was paralyzed. My mother was only 7 when the family moved to LaSalle County. Since the Hinkle place came without shelter, running water, or electricity, the family had to live out of the truck for the first several months. The closest store was no less than 15 miles away in Cotulla. The first thing the family did was to dig a 20-foot cistern to catch and save rainwater. After finishing the cistern, my granddad and uncles drove over 130 miles to Corpus Christi to buy lumber to build their house. Everybody in the family, including my mother, literally worked their fingers to the bone to build a new life in LaSalle County. The Hinkles settled in, built their house, and over the next 5 years, both managed to feed themselves and make enough profit from the land to buy 2 more adjoining sections. Since several of the children were school age, and there were no nearby schools, my granddad hired a live-in tutor to school the children. Tragically, in 1928, my granddad died as a result of a gun accident, leaving my grandmother to head the family. With the youngest 2 children needing schooling, my grandmother moved the family to Cotulla. My uncles Ben, Frank, and Charlie were charged with building the Hinkle house, and living by the admonition, waste not, want not, they disassembled the house on the ranch and used much of the lumber to build the Cotulla house. I'm proud to say that the Cotulla house still stands. Over the next several years, life got a little better for the Hinkles, and my uncles married, bought their own land, and started their own families. By 1933, when my mother graduated high school, my grandmother was able to send her to San Marcos State Teachers College, now Texas State University, and become a school teacher. Just as the Moon family met life's challenges and made the best of it, so too did the Hinkle family. My parents, Tom and Louise, were part of what Tom Brokaw has dubbed the greatest generation. This generation entered adulthood at the beginning of the Great Depression, and then were confronted by World War II. My dad graduated from Cleveland High in 1931 and enrolled at the University of Texas, just as the Great Depression engulfed the nation. But after 1 semester, he had to drop out to help my granddad to try and save the dealership. After my granddad was forced to close the dealership, my dad left Cleveland and took a series of whatever jobs he could get. One of those jobs was working the oil fields of South Louisiana. I can remember him recounting what it was like to try to work while fighting off mosquitoes in the Louisiana swamps. My mother was more fortunate than my dad and was able to finish college and get a job as a school teacher. My dad and mother met in 1941 and got married in December, just after Pearl Harbor. In early 1942, my dad was drafted and my mother returned to Cotulla to live with her family until my dad came home from the war. In May 1942, my mother took a train trip to Trenton, New Jersey to visit my dad, who was undergoing basic training at a nearby Army camp. I was conceived during that trip. My dad, along with thousands of others, was then shipped off to England to train for the upcoming Normandy invasion. My mother remained in Cotulla and awaited my arrival in the following February. My dad served in the 90th Division of Patton's Third Army, and although he wasn't in the first wave of the invasion, the 90th Division fought its way through France all the way to Czechoslovakia. Luckily, my dad survived the war with no scars, at least none that he ever talked about or that I could see, and returned to my mom and me in Cotulla in late 1945. In 1946, family life began for my dad, mom, and me. After a couple of temporary jobs, my dad joined the Veterans Administration in 1946 in Fort Worth, Texas. In that same year, my dad bought us a small frame house in South Fort Worth, in which our family, which was joined by my younger brother Bill in early 1947, lived for the next 16 years. My first 2 years were spent in Cotulla with my mom waiting for my dad. Over the years, I spent all my summers in Cotulla with my grandmother and 2 aunts, Annie and Eddie. The Cotulla of the 1950s and 1960s was a combination of Larry McMurtry's Archer City out of The Last Picture Show and Andy Griffith's Mayberry out of his TV show. The times I spent in Cotulla were invaluable in helping me understand small town life and culture. Except for a 5-year stint in which my dad, like my granddad before him, ran a service station. He worked for the VA. The frame house just behind the service station is the house in which my brother Bill and I grew up. In the early 1950s and early 1960s, air conditioning was still a luxury for most Americans, and for us, it too was a luxury that we couldn't afford. My dad's job in the VA involved helping disabled veterans get the training they needed to get a job and re-enter normal life to the extent possible, and he did it well. In helping veterans, my dad tempered practicality with compassion. Health permitting, my mom taught school. Although my dad and mom worked, our family had trouble making ends meet. because my mom had a number of medical problems due to being thrown by a horse in her youth. Throughout her life, my mom had to contend with chronic health problems. Sadly, my dad died an early death in 1954 because of lung cancer. As many of the greatest generation, he was a chain smoker. My mother worked to the extent she could into her 60s and died in her 80s in 2001. My brother Bill and I were each blessed with excellent schooling in the Fort Worth Public Schools of the 1950s and early 1960s. Each of us attended B.H. Carroll Elementary, Rosemont Junior High School, and Pascal High School. To the extent that I didn't learn all I could have, it was my fault, not that of my teachers. After surviving high school, I enrolled in TCU and attended on a Sears scholarship, meaning I lived at home, worked as a stock boy at the Sears store in the newly constructed nearby Seminary South. My brother Bill also had a scholarship to TCU, but his was academic because he graduated summa cum laude from high school. Upping my academic performance, I obtained both a BA and MA from TCU with majors in government and history and graduated with an ROTC commission in the Air Force. My brother Bill also graduated TCU, again summa cum laude, and with an ROTC commission in the Air Force. Immediately after finishing my MA coursework, before going on active duty, I married Jeannie, my wife of 53 years. After serving 4 years as an intelligence officer, I was discharged and decided to become a lawyer. Along with Bill, I attended law school at the University of Texas. Unlike our dad, whose academic career was derailed by the Great Depression, Bill and I graduated in 1971 and embarked on parallel law careers. Like others in my generation, I was able to go to college and law school and graduate with little debt. In those days, state legislatures appropriated sufficient funds to keep tuition low. With cheap tuition and the GI Bill that I got because of my military service, I was able to finish my education and have very little college debt to contend with. Bill became a corporate lawyer and successfully practiced law for over 30 years with a major Dallas law firm. My legal career was much more varied than Bill's. While still in law school, I was introduced by one of my professors, who happened to be the parliamentarian of the Texas State Senate, to State Senator Wayne Conley from Floresville. Senator Conley was the younger brother of the former governor and then Secretary of the Treasury, John Conley. I worked for Senator Conley during the 62nd legislature in 1971. As one who'd always been interested in public affairs and politics, it was an opportunity for me to learn the practical side of politics. At the end of the legislative session, Senator Conley asked me to work for him as a campaign aide in his upcoming campaign for lieutenant governor. I readily agreed, and upon graduation from law school, I spent the first 6 months of 1971 working on the campaign. My job was to travel with the senator and, among other things, write some of his speeches, make his calls to local politicians, take care of his luggage and laundry, babysit his kids, remember names and telephone numbers of supporters, and keep in contact with the campaign headquarters and staff. For me, it was an exciting time, and I met and got to know people and politicians that I'd only read about. Although I was disappointed when the senator lost his race to Bill Hobby, I learned that elected politics wasn't for me. I've always been more interested in the policy side of politics than the elective side. So, having gained a lot of practical experience but having no job, I embarked upon my legal career in late 1971. In November, I accepted a job as an IRS staff attorney in Philadelphia. With my wife Jeannie, we moved to the New Jersey suburbs of Philly, and I began work with the IRS. After 2 years, Jeannie and I decided to return to Texas, and I accepted a job as an enforcement attorney in the Fort Worth regional office of the SEC. For the next 6 years, I worked as a staff attorney, then as a chief enforcement attorney, and finally as assistant regional administrator. During my tenure, I investigated and litigated cases involving, among other things, fraud by broker-dealers, municipal bond frauds, and accounting frauds. The SEC job gave me an opportunity to investigate big cases involving complex financial matters, travel to major cities such as New York, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles, and deal with attorneys from leading national law firms. I learned about the worlds of business and finance and how securities markets worked. As much as I loved working for the SEC, I decided in 1980 that it was time for me to leave for private practice. In April 1980, I accepted a job with a boutique public finance firm specializing in issuing tax-exempt municipal bonds. Somewhat to my surprise, the practice of public finance law was extremely political. In retrospect, it shouldn't have been a surprise because almost all the firm's clients were state and local governments, and those who hired us were elected politicians. The senior partner in the firm had been a recent unsuccessful candidate for governor, and another partner had recently been the Speaker of the Texas House of Representatives. So after 8 years of working for two non-political federal agencies, I was back in politics. I joined the firm as an associate, but in a year was made a partner. Due to the changing nature of the legal business, I left the firm to join another firm and later yet another firm. Over a 25-year period, I was a partner in 3 major Dallas law firms, which gave me valuable insights in the business side of law as well as the legal side. As a public finance lawyer, I participated in structuring and documenting hundreds of financings for cities, counties, school districts, state agencies, and various types of nonprofits. Many of these financings were in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The types of financings that I worked on included, among others, hospitals, public utilities, multifamily housing projects, water and sewer projects, street improvements, higher education facilities, student housing projects, commercial office buildings, pollution control facilities, and various types of medical facilities. Almost all these deals involved issuing tax-exempt bonds, that is, bonds the interest on which was exempt from federal income taxation. And many of these deals involved public-private partnerships in which state and local governments induced private businesses to undertake projects based on assisting them in obtaining various types of tax subsidies. Most of these financings involve complex tax issues regarding depreciation, tax credits of various types, and issues regarding eligibility for capital gains treatment. Oftentimes, the economic viability of a project depended on its qualifying for various tax breaks. Much of my practice as a result focused on working out tax structures that assured that a project would qualify for the maximum number of tax benefits. Over the years, I consulted with any number of tax attorneys and accountants regarding what kind of tax structures were possible and what kind of legal opinions could be given. Since many of these financings were in the millions, I routinely worked with leading Wall Street investment banking firms, national law firms, national rating agencies, money center banks and trust departments, successful real estate developers, and leading accounting firms and appraisers, as well as other types of consultants. My knowledge of both tax policy and politics didn't come from the academic world or the world of think tanks. It came from the School of Hard Knocks. My perspective on tax policy is that of a practitioner who did deals for over 25 years and saw what made them work and who benefited from them. Looking back on my experiences, I've concluded that tax subsidies that made these deals possible benefited almost exclusively only those who were promoting the projects and those of us who packaged the deals and got them financed. It was the well-off, not the public, that benefited from tax subsidies. A perfect example of what some people have called crony capitalism. Tax subsidies that aid private businesses are paid for by either increasing taxes on the general public or by adding to the national debt. In either case, tax subsidies make it much more difficult to pay for public programs that have a higher priority. I've come to believe that using tax dollars to invest in the future of the middle class is a better use of tax dollars than subsidizing private businesses and uneconomic public projects. After practicing law for almost 40 years, I retired and then had time to reflect upon what I'd learned. Neither the Moon family nor the Hinkle family produced any super successful moneymakers. But both families typified millions of other similar families in producing hardworking, patriotic citizens who contributed to transforming America from a provincial agricultural country separated from the rest of the world by 2 oceans at the beginning of the 20th century to a cosmopolitan economic powerhouse and the world's leading nation by the end of the 20th century. In my 40 plus years in law and politics, I've seen and gotten to know many super successful moneymakers, and almost all of them came from the middle class. The middle class is America's incubator for most of those who will be super successful. A healthy middle class will spawn more super successful moneymakers, and America needs as many super successful moneymakers as possible. All of this has instilled in me the belief that no effort should be spared to preserve and grow America's middle class. Since I have 2 daughters in their 40s and 4 grandchildren approaching their teens, I'm concerned about the challenges of life that they and those of their generations will have to contend with. The challenges that confronted my grandparents' generation were weather and commodity prices, and an economy that was transitioning from agriculture to commerce and industry. The challenges that confronted my parents' generation were the Great Depression and World War II. The challenges that confront my children's and grandchildren's generations are an economy that's being overwhelmed by the relentless forces of globalization and automation. Globalization and automation have made quality post-secondary education more important than ever, suppressed the wages of those with ordinary money-making skills, and rewarded as never before in modern times those with extraordinary skills and capitalists. The suppression of the wages of the middle class has left them with not nearly enough market income to live a middle-class standard of living, pay for their own health care, save for a decent retirement, and pay for their children's post-secondary education. A middle class afflicted with a declining standard of living, inadequate health care, poor retirement benefits, and whose children are unable to get the post-secondary education necessary for them to realize their potential won't end America, but it will end America's greatness. What made America great was the prosperity of its middle class, and if that prosperity fades into memory, so too will America's greatness. Preserving a middle-class standard of living for Americans with ordinary money-making skills means expanding social insurance, and ensuring that all Americans can get all the education they need to realize their full potential means expanding both public and higher education programs. Expanded social insurance and education programs will be expensive, but it'll be the best investment America can make. A prosperous and growing middle class, providing highly skilled workers for the economy, consumers with money in their pockets to buy America's goods and services, and citizens who have a positive social and political outlook, is the most valuable asset America can have. Paying for the public investments necessary to preserve and grow the middle class without exploding an already bulging national debt will require two major changes in tax policy. First, those at the top will have to pay significantly higher taxes, and second, existing tax subsidies that benefit private businesses will have to be ended. Simultaneously increasing taxes at the top and ending tax subsidies in business is a seemingly insurmountable challenge. But I believe that it's a challenge worth overcoming, and that's why I've written the Payback book and created the Payback channel. Thanks for watching.